Well, the United States has reached their limit of national debt to 106.7% of its GDP as in relation to the size of the economy. The parties in US Congress have been at loggerheads over debt ceiling negotiations. But the question is, will India weather the storm if the US stares a default? Here's our report. The world's biggest economy could run out of cash and default on its debt for the first time ever. What is the US debt ceiling and why does it matter? Well, the US Congress first introduced the debt ceiling, the upper limit of the money that the government could borrow, back in 1917. The measure meant the government no longer needed approval from lawmakers over every debt issued. Now, over the past 7 decades, the debt ceiling has been raised a whopping 78 times.
That defaulting on the debt is simply not an option. Our economy would fall into recession. It would devastate retirement accounts, increase borrowing costs, and according to Moody's, nearly 8 million Americans would lose their jobs and our international reputation would be damaged in the extreme if we were to let that happen.
We should find ways that we cap the amount of spending going outlay because the Democrats had spent so much.
How would a debt default impact the global economy? In short, a US default could spark a global economic crisis. The Treasury Department has predicted that the US government would begin to run out of funds as early as the 1st of June, a move that would have far-reaching consequences for the US and the global economy. The lack of funds would force the US Treasury to likely prioritize spending so that debt payments and interest payments are made first. That could mean delays to the payments of salaries of tens of millions of public sector workers in the US, Social Security payments and healthcare subsidies to older and vulnerable Americans could also be put on hold. An analysis by Biden's economic advisors has warned that even a brief default would cost the US economy 5 lakh jobs. They believe a protracted default would send their GDP plunging by 6% with the loss of tens of thousands of businesses. But in a worst case scenario, the US would have to stop borrowing altogether by July or August, which would send further shockwaves through global financial markets and tip the rest of the world into a deep recession. A more serious default would cause a sharp decline in the US dollar, causing chaotic fluctuations in exchange rates and spiking the prices of oil and other commodities as well.
A US default would generate an economic and financial catastrophe. Over the past few years, American families and businesses, including many of yours, have worked hard to mount an historic economic recovery. And a default would reverse all of the hard-earned progress that we've made.
How will the debt ceiling impact us in India? If the US defaults, we are likely to feel the jitters here. The US default could lead to a sharp fluctuation in domestic currency markets and put stress on equity markets as well.
If there's a recession in the US economy, then our export demand would be affected. On the other hand, if the commodity prices drop because of the recession, that would help, control inflation in India. So in other words, there could be some positive effect. The dollar would weaken, the rupee would strengthen a little bit.
But as the US president continues talks, history seems to back him. The US has always managed to raise its debt ceiling 78 times in the 63 years since the US Congress first enacted the debt limit, 49 times under Republican presidents and 29 times under Democratic presidents.
Speaker McCarthy and I have had several productive conversations, and our staffs continue to meet as we speak, as a matter of fact, and they're making progress. I've made clear time and again defaulting on our national debt is not an option.
And joining us now is Voice of America White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara. Well, Patsy, it sounds like we are maybe starting to see some signs of momentum towards a deal in the US. But how close are the two sides really?
Well, as we speak, both the White House and Republicans in Congress are still trying to hammer out a deal down to the last minute. There's still a lot of issues to be worked through, but there are signs of progress. However, I must stress that even if an agreement is achieved, it still takes some time to put that plan into action. Congress has to review it, and then they also have to put it through the process. So it may not happen, even if a deal is reached today or tomorrow or sometime sometimes during the weekend, it may not happen soon enough before the so-called X date. And that is the date when the U.S. Treasury says that they may be running out of money to pay for all their obligations and their debts and their bills. And also remember that right now in the U.S., this weekend and also Monday is a holiday weekend. So members of Congress are being sent home, also with a notice to return to Washington if a deal is struck. So there's a lot of things going on, a lot of balls in the air. And of course, it's a very nervous time for both people in Washington, in the United States, and also for global finance overall.
Right, Patsy, also, once the US Treasury is unable to pay the bills on time, markets, as we know, will start to react immediately. Now, experts are saying that if it's a week, the US is definitely in a recession. If it's more than a few weeks, it's a deep downturn for the US. What is your analysis?
Well, the short answer to that question is we don't know. I mean, I've spoken to so many analysts who say that we actually don't know. I mean, we have our suspicion. Obviously, the U.S. is the biggest economy in the world. The dollar is a benchmark for many currencies, and many other economies borrow a lot, are investors of U.S. debt. Both China, Japan, also India buys a lot of U.S. Treasury bonds. And of course, all of these will be affected. All of these countries, all of these markets will be affected. But just how badly it will be affected, that's a big unknown because this has never happened before. As you know, the U.S. has inched towards a debt crisis, a debt ceiling crisis several times before, the latest in 2017, in 2013, 2011, but we've never gone past the brink. So we really don't know what's going to happen. Having said that, both the administration, the White House, President Joe Biden, as well as congressional Republicans, both say that they are not seeking, or they really are working their best to avoid this so-called, debt ceiling crisis, this so-called default on the U.S. Of its obligations. So there are some signs of a convergence between the two sides, including perhaps a freeze on government spending, which is what the Republicans want for a period of up to 2 years, with the raising of the debt ceiling until 2024 after the presidential election. So these are all just ideas that are being cooked out and hammered into by both sides. But still, there is no clear signs, no clear path at this point that there's going to be an agreement. Having said that, both sides are saying that there will be an agreement and the U.S. will avoid a default. Whether or not it can happen in time, that's still a big question.
Thank you so much, Patsy Widakuswara, for joining us with that quick update. That is Voice of America's correspondent, White House Bureau Chief, joining us with a quick update on the debt ceiling negotiations.